Maybe we could start. It's just about 7 or 1 p.m. in my office. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, you are all welcome to this high-level seminar organized in preparation for the 54th session of the Statistical Commission. Thank you for joining us to this interesting event. The title of this event is very ambitious. We talk about the future of social and demographic statistics. As you all may know, last year the Commission requested a review of the social and demographic statistics through a Friends of the Chair mechanism. Our discussion today provides feedback on the report of the Secretary General, and our feedback will serve as the basis of launching the work of the Friends of the Chair group. Our objective is to take stock of national and international efforts to improve social and demographic statistics, and more ambitiously again, to anticipate needs beyond 2030. Of course, the Sustainable Development Agenda gives us a lot of work in producing data to monitor progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. But of course, we also have to think about beyond 2030 and in anticipating what will be needed beyond 2030, we can put good development plans for social and demographic statistics in our agendas, and also nationally and globally also. Today we plan to have a public brainstorming session on what challenges we face in the field of social and demographic statistics and what solutions we can offer to better serve our users and stakeholders of social and demographic statistics. We are talking about people-based statistics, and that is very important because it means that we are talking about people's lives, about people's living circumstances, about their feelings, about how they perceive their lives. So this is all very, very policy relevant in our work. We often face difficulties in obtaining sufficient data, in identifying good data sources for the statistics that we have to produce. So we shall have to talk about what traditional and new data sources we can realistically use in the future, about how we can integrate data from different sources, how to produce data on vulnerable groups, how to produce more granular data, how to contribute with data to leaving no one behind, which is one of the main objectives of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. How can we integrate social, economic, and environmental data to produce integrated information on well-being and sustainability? That is very close to the Beyond GDP agenda. Can we construct a conceptual framework of social and demographic statistics? How can we use the experience of existing social accounts to develop new social and demographic accounts? How can we use the opportunity of the ongoing revision of the SNA to integrate well-being and sustainability into the concept of national accounts, and how can social and demographic statistics contribute to that? So I think our view has to be very broad. It will cover everything in social and demographic statistics, a lot of statistical areas beyond that. And I think if we start our brainstorming today, we are just about in time to get into a good work program of the Friends of the Chair group, which will work for 3 years and get good results at the end of this period. Now I would like to give the floor to the director of the UN Statistical Division, to Stefan Schweinfetz, for his welcoming remarks, and then we can go further on. Stefan, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have to get used to those words again. Gabriela, good morning, everybody. I'm always very, very happy when it's the time of the Statistical Commission. Everybody knows that. The countdown is running 13 days and we will start our big family meeting in New York. And I'm looking forward to welcoming you there. But I'm welcoming you here right away because the Statistical Commission has already started all of these meetings with well over 100 people. I just see here the number 156 in the corner. Connected across the world is just a manifestation of our community. What are we doing here? Perhaps I can just take 2-3 minutes a bit for context. We used to have in the Statistical Commission the so-called program reviews. And this was also a way of holding ourselves accountable as a global community. We were asking ourselves, are we doing the right things? Are we discussing the right topics? Are we doing it the right way? Are the right people involved? Because we have a quite complex international architecture, national, regional, sub-regional, topical and global organizations. So, but we ran these program reviews for quite a number of years on very specific topics like labor statistics or education statistics and now about 2018 we had the idea of doing bigger integrated program reviews because I mean one of the challenges was also to integrate information across the board. And we took as a starting point our 3 pillars of the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations: economics, social, demographic, and environment. So we have done the economics review. And this is the second review now, the social and demographic, and we are planning to have the environment later. And the way we do it is the so-called mechanism of the Friends of the Chair. For those who are not familiar with, it's just a group of people, the Coalition of the Willing, that agree to work with the chair of the Statistical Commission, in this case, Gabriela, to work for a limited period of time at a rather high level on a specific strategic issue. So we are not creating a new mechanism here. It's really a task-oriented grouping. So I'm very happy that Gabriela herself jumped in to work on this. So it shows us that she is friendly with herself. She which is a good thing to start with. Now, I have to make a confession at the beginning. I'm an economist by training, so I may not be, I'm from that other tribe. I may not be so useful, but I'm in the wonderful situation that I have a really fantastic team under the leadership of my assistant director, Francesca Groom, and she and her team will do they are the real experts and they have already done a lot of preparatory work. So I will stop right here, just welcoming you all again and encouraging you to have fun, to enjoy the brainstorming, because we are at the very beginning of the process and we want to get the scoping right, that we have the right list of topics to look at, and perhaps to get a sense of priority. What are really the biggest issues that we can solve and we need to solve in the short and medium term? What is it that keeps you up at night? And what can we do? What can we as a global community, as a United Nations, do to help you? So those are the questions I'm looking for answers, and I'm very much looking forward to your discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan, for these welcoming words. And I would like to give now the floor to Francesca Groom, who is the Assistant Director in the Statistical Division, UN Statistical Division, to let us know more about the Friends of the Chair Group and other issues that are related to our work today. Thank you, Francesca.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gabriela, Stefan, and greetings to everyone. Of course, we are all very curious and we want to learn from our panelists and high-level speakers, so I'll keep it short. Just to add a couple of points to Stefan's introduction. First, the group, these Friends of the Chair mechanism, has already been established. We met once in November to discuss the scope of work and key priorities ahead of us. And we have also agreed on 2 initial work streams for the next 3 years. Of course, These are well described in the terms of reference that will be discussed at the upcoming Statistical Commission. And we really hope that we get feedback from member states to guide us and to streamline the amount of work that is ahead of us. But just to share with you, the two work streams that we are proposing for discussion are the following. So first of all, we would like to see how we can improve the coherence within the statistical pillar. So looking at the social and demographic statistics, making to scope the ecosystem, make a diagnostic or what we call a mapping exercise to understand what we are currently doing, collectively doing, looking at the many groups and task forces that are reporting to the Statistical Commission in New York, but also to the regional commissions, and see how we can improve their synergies and also maybe identify some gaps. That's task number one. That will keep us busy, but in parallel, we also try to assess how to improve the integration across the three statistical pillars. As both Gabriela and Stefan hinted, we will start working initially with the economic statistics pillar and see how we can propose some recommendations to improve data integration across the social, demographic, and economic statistics by also looking at a potential system of population and social accounts. I also want to acknowledge and thank the current members of the Friends of the Chair. From the member states side, we have, of course, Hungary. Gabriela is our co-chair of the group, together with Graciela for Mexico. We also have Canada, we have the UK that are speaking today. We have also Colombia and South Africa. So this is also an opportunity today and at the Statistical Commission in a couple of weeks to ask for additional assistance. And we hope that you will be interested in joining us, particularly if you are from the Global South. We really would like to have additional chief statisticians and their teams to support our work. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop here and I can eventually come back later if there are questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca, for this introduction of what the Friends of the Chair group will do and how we will do it. Now, I would like to welcome our panelists and also to introduce them. We have three excellent panelists today, and I would like to thank you all for accepting the invitation to talk today. Janet Woolford is the Director of Population Statistics at the UK Office of National Statistics. In this role, she is responsible for both the publication and the transformation of population statistics. Jen is a professional statistician with 25 years of experience working in official statistics, and she will share a lot of that experience with us today and later. José Beguin is the Assistant Chief Statistician of the Social Health and Labour Statistics in Statistics Canada. Before joining Statistics Canada in 2002, where she gained no, I'm sorry, I think I messed this up. I will start again. She started her career at the Canada Revenue Agency in 1994 before joining Statistics Canada in 2002, where she gained experience in overseeing large and complex statistical programs. Her current portfolio includes a number of large surveys and administrative data programs. Steve McFeely is the Director of Data and Analytics at the World Health Organization and adjunct professor at the Centre for Policy Studies at University College Cork in Ireland. He chairs several advisory bodies and is a member of the Statistical Advisory Panel to the UNDP Human Development Index. Before joining WHO, he was Chief Statistician at UNCTAD, and prior to that, he was Deputy Director General at the Central Statistics Office of Ireland, so he has national and international experience, both. I think we are in time to start our the first part of our panel. I would like to ask questions to the panelists. My first question to all panelists is, what are some of the key concerns, challenges, and priorities identified by data users you serve, and how did your systems evolve over the past few years?
Hi, so I think I'm coming in first there. So hello everyone, I'm Jen Wolford from the Office for National Statistics. I'd like to start by saying thank you for inviting me to be part of this side event. I'm really pleased to be here today, and ONS very much welcome the work of this Friends of the Chair group on social and demographic statistics, and fully support the work and the aims of the group. So it's really great to be here today, and I'm looking forward to be part of this conversation. In terms of my specific comments around the UK and our national context, I would like to start by saying something about the context of population statistics in the UK, and then move on to talk about how our increasingly diverse and mobile population is affecting user needs and making our job of producing population statistics more challenging as well, particularly in times of rapid change. And I thought I'd take a quick look at that through the lens of the COVID pandemic. So importantly, the UK is a nation of 4 countries, and some of the statistical responsibilities are devolved to the different nations of the UK. For example, population statistics are the responsibility of the devolved nations, whereas international migration statistics are a reserved matter, and so ONS is responsible for producing international migration statistics for the UK. So it's quite a complex picture. I don't really want to get into that today, but just for shorthand, I'm talking about the UK, but some of the work is specific to England and Wales, and we need to collaborate with our partner statistical organisations in our research and development. The other thing that's really important to know about the population statistics system in the UK is that we don't have a population register, and we have no unique person ID. So where we're looking to bring different data sources together, we have this additional complexity of trying to link data without having a high quality individual identifier to use to perform that linkage. So for 200 plus years, our population stats system has centred around a decennial census, which provides a 10-yearly snapshot of the population. It helps us to benchmark our population statistics and provides really detailed local level characteristics of the population. But in between the censuses, our characteristics information is derived from surveys, and so doesn't get down to particularly small geographies, so that local area information becomes out of date. And additionally, our population estimates we produce using a cohort component method. And we have very high quality registration data on births and deaths. So that aspect of population change we can measure well, but we find it much more difficult to estimate international migration and also movement between the different countries of the UK and within the countries of the UK. So over that 10-year period, we get some drift in our population estimates, which it's generally not too far out over the national context, but at small areas, at local geographies, that can sometimes be quite significant, particularly in areas that have quite a lot of population change. So the challenges we face with our traditional system then is that drift in our population estimates, and the fact that our small area understanding of local populations becomes out of date between censuses. And this all became particularly challenging during COVID, because at the start of the COVID pandemic, we were 9 years out from our census. So we were at that point in the cycle where our population demographic statistics are at their lowest quality, but at a point where there was greater policy need than ever before, really, for these statistics to be timely and accurate. We particularly saw challenges, there were different challenges in different areas as well, which added to the difficulty for us. So, for example, some of our towns and cities have very large student populations, higher education student populations. We didn't have the international students in those places, but also a lot of the domestic students didn't travel to the university towns. They stayed at their parental addresses. Also, we suspected that large numbers of people were moving out from urban areas, particularly during lockdown and furlough, and particularly single young adults who, rather than paying expensive rents, moved back to their parental homes. But our data really struggled to keep up to the pace with that population change. And our key registration data and health records, many of them were single source and held very little information about individuals' characteristics such as ethnicity and occupation. So we're in a situation where we didn't know what our local areas particularly looked like. So how could we understand what was driving local COVID outbreaks? We didn't know what people's characteristics were. So how could we understand what was driving inequalities in mortality rates? We didn't know people's occupations, so we couldn't really think about the impact of low vaccine take-ups in particular industries. And right down to if we didn't have confidence in our population estimates for small areas, how could we understand vaccine take-up rates? And even more challenging is the fact that marginalised groups and the people who were often most at risk during the pandemic were also the people that our statistics really struggled to capture. So all of this really highlighted the need for up-to-date, inclusive, small area, multivariate statistics on local populations. And also, when we think about the different dimensions of quality of what we're trying to measure, timeliness shot right up the list. So previously, we might have been prepared to take some time to design a collection instrument to really understand the data, make sure we're reporting well on quality. We didn't have that time and we didn't have that luxury. We had to move quickly because the most important thing was that we're reflecting what was happening on the ground. So one of the key things we did to tackle those information gaps was to quickly link data from a range of sources, including the 2011 and later the 2021 census, health data, administrative data, and vaccine data to create a public health data asset that allowed us to answer some of those policy questions. So moving on from that, although the policy pressures of COVID have reduced, our users still have this need and expectation for inclusive, timely, frequent, granular population statistics. And our population, as we move out of this COVID pandemic, is moving more and in different ways than it has in the past as well. So it's really important that we can detect and measure that rapid population change. And despite the lack of a population register or unique identifier, we still have access to a wide range of data. And we really want to build on the lessons that we learned during COVID and how we integrate these data sources and how we use them to drive policy change and improved outcomes for our population. So some of the key challenges we're facing now is how do we integrate data, particularly without a high quality linkage key? How do we understand and analyse these linked data sets and integrated data sets, which is quite a different type of statistics from what we've used previously? Really important thing is, do we have a mandate to do this? So during the pandemic, we had some emergency legal gateways put in place, but also the public acceptability of using data in this way was very high. But now that we're not in a national crisis, we need to look again at our legal gateways and and the public acceptability. And we are operating in a tight fiscal environment. So we want to keep building, but what can we actually afford to do as well? So those are some of the key challenges we're facing at the moment. In the second part of the session, I'll come on and say a little bit more about what we're doing to try and address those challenges. But for now, I'll leave it at that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jen, for this very interesting introduction of what you do in population statistics and what you did in crisis situations to fulfill policy needs, which emerged very suddenly. I think our adaptability to crisis situations is very important, and that will be one of the issues that we shall have to tackle during our work in the Friends of the Chair group. Now I would like to give the floor to José Beguin. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing your family name well, but Beguin or Beguin to talk to us about Statistics Canada's experience. Thank you, José.
Thank you, Gabriela. It's Beguin, but don't worry if you say Beguin.
Okay.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm very pleased to be here today. I would like to start by saying that Canada is fortunate to have a very rich social statistics data holdings. It features lots of data around labor, income, human capital, health, safety of the population. Social statistics also speak to the fact that Canada is culturally rich and diverse, and it acknowledges its colonial roots, honors its Indigenous peoples. In addition, Canada's social statistics respond to the data needs of a massive country made up of 10 provinces, 3 northern territories, with policy responsibilities split between the federal, provincial, municipal, territorial, and Indigenous governments. So it makes the statistical data scene very complex. Statistic Canada faces many challenges in common with other statistical organizations around the world. Thinking of declining response rates for our household surveys, rising cost of conducting surveys, the need to better integrate administrative data with survey data, filling data gaps and developing more timely, fit-for-purpose statistics. Users are looking for timely data, but also real-time statistics or information. And there are also many service providers or organizations trying to occupy the statistical space. So Statistics Canada also shares the goal with the Friends of the Chair Group on Social and Demographic Statistics of elevating the profile of social statistics in policy discourse. I think we would all agree to say that social statistics are most powerful when they can be used to give voice to diverse groups and communities to better reflect their experiences. And this is achieved through ensuring that we produce granular statistics, allowing us to identify populations or regions at risk of, example, poor mental health or social exclusion. Disaggregation of data also may mean different things to different users. You know, if we think in terms of geography, more local data, more granular data. So for example, maybe more information on new forms of employment, but it can also mean the intersection of different variables. The need for more disaggregated data became crucial at the onset of the pandemic. For example, around employment, mental health, educational outcome, as policymakers wanted to understand the impact of the pandemic on the Canadian population. So I'd like to cover 2 initiatives that we currently have going on at Statistics Canada. The first one is what we call the Disaggregated Data Action Plan. So this is an initiative that is supported by a major investment from the Canadian government. And this plan includes investment to increase sample sizes in key social surveys. One of the goals too is to harmonize the standards to promote comparison of data over time, but also across the jurisdictions. To add new content on some of our flagship surveys, such as the Labor Force Survey, and to increase analytical insights on diverse groups of people. And this will lead to the production of detailed statistical information to highlight the experiences of specific population groups, such as women, Indigenous peoples, racialized populations, and people living with disability. And I really want to give an example of the power of disaggregated data. So when we look at life expectancy, we've been measuring the differences in life expectancy between men and women for a very long time, many decades. However, to take an intersectional lens, we must understand the outcomes of men and women in various vulnerable population groups, including Indigenous and racialized populations. So new disaggregated measures of life expectancy by gender and Indigenous groups allow us to both measure the gaps and track changes over time. So for example, the life expectancy for First Nations household population at age 1 was 72.5 years for males and 77.7 years for females. So that's 8.9 and 9.6 years shorter than for non-Indigenous males and females. So over time, we've been able also to track that while the life expectancy for all groups improved between 2006 and 11, the gain for First Nation men was less than for non-Indigenous men, while there was no difference between Indigenous and non-Indigenous women. And we also have similar results available for Métis and Inuit groups. And similar measures for men and women in the Black community are being released today at Statistics Canada at 8:30, and this is a first in Canada. So I use that example because these types of health outcome indicators are made possible through the integration of already existing data, in this case, census and mortality data, which enable routine monitoring over time in a consistent and standardized way and enable an intersectional approach. And these disaggregated measures can inform policy development and planning intended to advance health equity. The second initiative that I would like to discuss quickly is one around the Canadian government has recently developed a quality of life framework. And this conceptual framework highlights 5 domains, 14 subdomains, and brings together social indicators. There's about 83 of them, with environmental and economic indicators to highlight how different forces act and interact to create well-being among the population. So the framework emphasizes the production and use of inequality indicators to demonstrate how these factors are distributed fairly or unfairly among people. It also emphasizes the sustainability of well-being, highlighting trade-offs between today's well-being and future well-being. The purpose of the framework is to provide data and analytical tools for policymakers to make better policies. A key aspect of the well-being framework is that it goes beyond social indicators to include economic and environmental aspects, as these also have key roles to play in well-being. In this way, the quality of life framework can improve the horizontal integration of data across the 3 dimensions of sustainable development to achieve integrated economic, social, and environmental statistics. So the quality of life framework is supported by a significant ongoing investment by the Government of Canada, also to create an online data and research hub, as well as funding data gaps. So for Statistics Canada, it means integration of data or new survey data. So and here is the link, under our disaggregated data action plan, one of the priorities for us is to help disaggregate those indicators that we find in the quality of life framework so that we can apply the equity, the fairness, and the sustainability lenses. And I will stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you, José, for letting us know about these extremely interesting and exciting developments that you are doing, both in terms of the disaggregation action plan and also the framework of quality of life. I think they will be very useful in our work again, and we shall have to share this in more detail with other national systems. Now I give the floor to Steve McFeely. May I just drop in a word to the audience? Please mute your microphones, because sometimes we have different noises and it's a bit disturbing. So please mute your microphones. But now I will give back the floor to Steve McFeely to share with us his national and international experience. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Gabriela, and good morning to New York, good afternoon to Europe, and good evening to our friends in Asia. So today I'm representing the WHO, but I'm also representing the chief statisticians of the UN system. So I won't go through the demands because there are just so many and varied. But what I will say is there is 2 common themes. The first is improved timeliness, and I think others have mentioned that. But in fact, regarding timeliness, now we see pressure increasingly for real-time statistics. And this is an issue I think the Friends of the Chair should discuss, because I'm not sure if it's the misuse of English or has the demand for timeliness really accelerated it so much. And then also disaggregation. There's more and more demand, and I think we need to discuss as well what's the appropriate level of disaggregation. As a compiler of international statistics, sometimes it's hard to find the coherence in these demands. And also, I think it's noteworthy that there are some statistics that we don't always get asked for. But does that mean that we should not compile them? I mean, one of the role of international statistics, I would argue, is actually to provide some uncomfortable truths. So as we assess the demands and the priorities, I think we need to be careful that we don't deprioritize some statistics just because they're awkward. I think too, we also get asked for some statistics that we've already published, and I think that's something we should think about too, which is just around our communications to make sure that users understand the data that's already there. So to help contextualize this, I think, Gabriela, you mentioned this in your opening remarks. I think a noticeable difference between social and economic statistics is that unlike economic statistics, social and demographic statistics don't have an overarching conceptual framework. There's no equivalent of the system of national accounts. Now, you can see this as a negative in that there isn't necessarily coherence between the different variables in the surveys. But we can also see it as a positive in that there's fewer constraints and that we have more freedoms to look at new variables and new surveys because they don't necessarily need to adhere or add up to an overarching framework. But one immediate or obvious disadvantage of the lack of a coherent framework is that it makes modeling, particularly if you're trying to nowcast or forecast social phenomena, much more difficult because the relationships and the associations between the variables are much more complex and much more unpredictable. Also, I think an issue that we should discuss is the vulnerability of social and demographic statistics. I think there's huge pressures, both from a cost reduction perspective, because many surveys and census are very expensive. But I think too, we're also seeing a slow but inexorable deterioration in the social contract. And I think all countries are experiencing this difficulty in getting households to participate with surveys. We see a growing reluctance for respondents to cooperate. And this presents a double challenge. So for example, if we're looking at now the need to move beyond GDP, we see pressures to produce well-being statistics, informal economy statistics, even unpaid care statistics. So as a simple example, it's clear that surveys like time use surveys need to move into the mainstream or regular statistical production. But there seems to be a reluctance to finance them. And it's not immediately clear also that household surveys are willing to invest the time to complete such complex diary-based surveys. So I think realistically, one of the elements of the conversation that we will need to have is the discussion of alternate sources. Can we get access, or are these sources stable? But also, from a national perspective, I think having this conversation is relatively straightforward. But from an international perspective, it's much less straightforward because it's not clear always that member states are willing to allow international organizations to use alternate data sources to derive and publish international statistics. So I think there's a discomfort there maybe for some member states, and I think that's a conversation we need to have if we're really going to look forward and discuss alternate approaches for social and demographic statistics. So I'll stop here, Gabriela.
Thank you, Steve. It's very interesting that you mentioned that. I will comment just very briefly on your last remark to see how national ownership and the opportunities of international organizations to produce national data or data for countries can be, let's say, controversial sometimes, but maybe useful at other times. So I think this is also something which we have to think about, as you said. And thank you for mentioning conceptual and practical issues, which are also two different levels of thinking that we shall have to introduce in our discussions, further discussions. Thank you for that. And I think it's time. Yes, it's time. I recognize the time limits for our second part, the second part of our event, to go from country experiences to global recommendations. And I will ask again a question to our three panelists. How do you think the Friends of the Chair, Social and Demographic, so the Friends of the Chair group, could reflect and build on your country or organizational experience? How we can build in the future on that. Jen, if you would like to start.
Thank you. So for my remarks now, I think it could be clear that I'm talking very much about England and Wales within the UK, because now I'm much more focused on what we're doing with population, and that is ONS responsible for population statistics for England and Wales, but collaborating with our partners in Scotland and Northern Ireland. But we're all taking our development work and our research in slightly different directions. So that gives us a challenge of comparability that I won't go into here, but it's kind of comparability within the country. I appreciate we find it complex. It's probably not quite as complex as the situation in Canada in terms of the different responsibilities. So anyway, in England and Wales, within ONS, we're in the throes of a significant programme of transformation of our population and migration statistics. It's been in train for some time, so it was in train before the pandemic, but now we're really building on our learnings throughout COVID, and the kind of our experiences that I set out earlier have really helped to further shape and refine our plans. I'd like to just run through three of our key developments and how we might want to learn, share our learning and learn from other countries in those areas. So firstly is a conceptual framework for population statistics, not as going as far as a system of national accounts, but thinking about our core demographic measures there. And then secondly is the data infrastructure that we're developing for data linkage. And thirdly, a dynamic population model that we're building. And again, a key thing, sorry to labour this point, but one of the key challenges for us is we don't have a population register, we don't have a unique ID. So underpinning all of this are issues of accuracy and record linkage and some of the challenges that gives us. But if I start with the conceptual framework for population statistics, so we're developing this based on our understanding of user needs and the various population bases and population subgroups that our users are interested in, and particularly recognising that the usual residence population base is not the one that our users are interested in some circumstances. So how do we make sure we reflect those uses? And what the framework looks to do is to define some mutually exclusive but together exhaustive subgroups of the population. And then through that, we can look at how we define and focus on each of those groups, particularly thinking about some of those populations that have been excluded from our statistics or quite difficult to measure in our statistics in the past. That's building on the findings of our Inclusive Data Task Force, which concluded with the same mantra as the SDG mantra, leave no one behind. And in the UK, particularly includes those populations who aren't living within private households, so those within common establishments or those more mobile populations. And our hope is that by creating those building blocks, it allows people to create the population definitions, the population bases or look at the population subgroups that they're interested in, but in a way that is consistent and coherent, because ultimately we know how the different numbers are constructed. And we're really keen to kind of learn from other countries who've adopted this kind of approach in some of the how we take this work forward. If I then move on to the data infrastructure that we're creating, it's similarly aligned. It's not quite social, economic, and environment, but we have three different indices that we are creating that allow us to link statistics across different domains. So we have an address register, we have a business register, and then we have what we're calling a demographic index. And that demographic index brings together lots of different data sources, largely administrative data sources, and creates a list essentially of ever-present people. So anyone who has ever interacted with an administrative system in the UK. In using that infrastructure, there are two key demographic products that we're looking to develop. The first of those is what we're calling a statistical population data set, which goes from that ever-present demographic index to look for signs of life in our different systems. And where people have interacted with one of our administrative systems, does that give us confidence that they are present in our resident population, and therefore we would include them in our statistical population data set? So quite challenging. Obviously, it's a set of business rules, and there's lots of different things that we could choose to include in those business rules. But we've got some really promising findings from our first few versions of the statistical population data set. The second product we're developing through that linked data infrastructure is a linked longitudinal population data set. So starting from our 2021 census, and then following people through time as they interact with different administrative systems or with our surveys, or looking at what other data sources we can build in there to give that life journey for individuals so that we can really track through to outcomes. And the key challenge that we're working with at the moment is, how do you do that cohort refresh? So how do you know, obviously, as I said before, we have good registration data, so we know when people die or when people are born, but understanding when people move in and out of the country or in and out of local areas is the real challenge for us. So that's our key focus at the moment, is that cohort refresh, but also, given the financial situation, looking to really demonstrate the benefits of this kind of approach through what we're calling satellite cohorts. So we're building a cohort of armed forces veterans and a cohort of refugees, so we can understand the outcomes for those population subgroups, which are of real policy interest in the UK at the moment. And then the final thing that I wanted to talk about quickly is our what we're calling a dynamic population model, which we're using to create consistent and coherent estimates of migration of population, so balancing the stocks and flows information that we hold. And that model brings together a wide range of sources, so statistical population data set that I've already mentioned, range of individual admin data sources, survey data, migration estimates, registration data, aggregate data can feed into our models. We've got quality measures as we understand more of the quality of the different sources, demographic rates, bringing all of those different data sources together into a statistical model that provides us with the best quality estimates of the population, both stocks and flows, that we can get to. And to move on to Stephen's point about real-time stats, we've built some nowcasting into that as well, so we can provide estimates, real-time estimates of the population, which we've never been able to do before. So where we are with all of this, I mentioned the tight fiscal position. We've submitted a business case for funding to take forward the implementation and further development of our ambitious plans, and hope to hear the outcome of that reasonably soon. And we're working towards a recommendation on the future of population statistics at the end of this calendar year, so at the end of 2023, to really set out what our future plans look like. So obviously we're all operating in very different contexts, but we're really keen to share our learning and our thinking on all of these developments, and to learn from others who may be further down the line than us, or kind of got slightly different systems, but that we can read across from. So thank you.
Thank you, Jen. I think this is all very, very valuable, because you say you don't have registers. Obviously, that makes a difficult situation for you. But of course, there are many other countries who don't have registers, or statistical systems that have difficulties in accessing registers. So I think it will be a good model and good experience that you can share on what methodologies can be used instead of using registers. José, would you like to continue?
Thank you, Gabriela. At this point, I want to share another experience that another initiative that we have at Statistics Canada. And it's linked to what we've discussed or what we've heard so far around the use of administrative data, data integration, and timeliness being 3 areas where social statistics may improve. So another initiative that we have at Statistics Canada, which we call the Social Data Integration Platform, is designed to address these issues. The Social Data Integration Portal is a new way of thinking about data and data processing. So we see it as a culture shift in how we proceed to collect our data. The initial manner to respond to data needs from our partners, our users, is not to conduct a survey anymore. So we need to see things a bit differently. Two key components of the platform are the social data linkage environment and the Canadian Social Survey. So I will briefly describe both. The social data linkage environment is a storehouse of relevant administrative data, census data, and survey data, which are all linkable via linkage keys, such that data sets can be combined quickly to help answer important policy questions. In addition, linkage key libraries are available for when new administrative or survey data are available, protecting privacy and confidentiality of our respondents as well. This tool has, for example, allowed Statistics Canada to integrate and analyze administrative data on COVID pandemic supports according to racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic status, so that policymakers could see what groups were being supported by pandemic benefits. And that analysis helped them shape the suite of benefits offered over time throughout the pandemic. On the other side, the new Canadian Social Survey is a new survey initiative designed to provide rapid information on the population and social conditions. It is administered quarterly and is designed to be processed and released within a few weeks. This innovation has, for example, allowed Statistics Canada to produce information on the impacts of recent increases in inflation on Canadians' well-being. The social data integration platform was key in positioning the agency to better respond to the data needs and insights of our users at the beginning of the pandemic. Whether it was to integrate data to answer policy questions, as the example I've provided earlier, or to collect information on the health of Canadians and the impact of the pandemic, or on different population groups such as students or racialized groups, our data fit for purpose, such as a representative web panel that we've conducted or crowdsourcing exercise that we've conducted to take the pulse of the Canadian population on a specific theme. So I want to come back and link these three initiatives together. I've mentioned in part one, the Disaggregated Data Action Plan, the Quality of Life Framework, and now the Social Data Integration Platform. They all work together to elevate the social statistics system in Canada. And indeed, work is currently underway to use these and other innovations to develop a new national system of quality of life statistics based on the Quality of Life Framework that I mentioned in part one. And when mature, this system of tools and processes integrated by this conceptual framework would be used to help us set priorities, help us guide data collection, help with the identification of data gaps, and lead to new ways to disseminate data and help also to engage our partners. These efforts all align well with the goals of the Friends of the Chair group on social and demographic statistics. And I feel that Statistics Canada will have much to contribute to and much to gain from as well, the knowledge sharing brought about by this group. Thank you.
Thank you, José, for this again exciting introduction of what and how Statistics Canada does. And I think what is very important is that all these undertakings serve analytical purposes, they serve planning purposes, internal planning and priority setting purposes, and of course all stakeholders can benefit from it. And moreover, in the end, after some initial investments, which is necessary in statistics, and I cannot be more emphatic than that right now because we don't have time for that, but after an initial investment, it will also yield efficiencies. So I think this is all a very important experience for all national statistical systems. Steve, please, your turn to answer the initial question.
Thanks, Gabriella. Well, I think the Friends of the Chair can play a very useful role, both in setting out the national and international social and demographic landscape. Francesca mentioned at the outset a mapping exercise. I think allied to this would be very useful to do a supply and demand statistics analysis. So on the demand side, what are the policy and the public requirements, both now and as far as we can tell in the future? But then on the supply side, what are the existing and potential data sources that could address those needs? And that will help us to look at the mismatches or asymmetries between the supply and demand sides. But I think then to build on that, we could then try and assess, like, are all demand side requests legitimate? And do we prioritize some requests over others? And do we deprioritize some existing data streams? And how might we do that? What would be the criteria that would allow us to have that discussion? I think another big issue that we could address is how to factor sustainability into social and demographic statistics. So in economic statistics, we have methods for discounting economic phenomena, but how do we discount social phenomena? And I think this will be of growing importance in the years to come. As I mentioned in my previous intervention, I think it's really important that we address both the needs of national but also international statistics, because they are quite different. And then the discussion of the conceptual framework. Does it make sense to have a conceptual framework for social and demographic statistics? Would it be useful? I think this would be a very, very interesting conversation. I also mentioned nowcasting, and I think this is something that will become very important if it's not already. And a big question for me, are the current models that have largely been developed on the economic side, are they fit for purpose when we try and model the much more complex social and demographic world? I think too, it'll be interesting and useful to discuss communications. My sense is that the importance of social and demographic statistics are not fully understood, and in particular their importance to economic statistics, which is often where the money is. So for example, like a simple example is population. Population estimates are critical for providing denominators for many indicators. Without per capita estimates, we can't compare many phenomena that differ in scale. And I don't think that that's fully appreciated. I think that's just taken as a given. It's a denominator that they use without fully understanding the complexity and the cost of constructing that denominator. Then I think the integration of primary and secondary data, a few people, Jen has mentioned this and others, I think this will be very important. How do we merge primary data with secondary data, whether it's admin data, big data, or even now we hear a lot of chatter about citizen science data. And I think this will be very important when we try and address the more emerging and complex issues like informal work, unpaid work, even gender issues. The impact of digitization on work and on society, not just on the economy. And for issues like beyond GDP and well-being. So how do we integrate all of these data sources so that we're getting a coherent picture, not just in social, but across social and economic statistics? And then I'd like to conclude and just picking up on something that Jen mentioned, which I think is really important. To really think about the future of social and demographic statistics, we need to really look at the supporting national data infrastructure. Do we have strong statistical legislation? Do we have unique identifiers? Do we have sufficiently good governance that will give us access to all of the data that we need and to make sure that we protect individuals' identities? And look at this from the perspective both then of national coordination and cooperation between ministries and the statistics offices, and then also between coordination between NSOs and ourselves at the international level. So let me stop there.
Thank you, Steve. Very, very interesting thoughts. And I think when you said maybe economic statisticians don't always realize the importance of social and demographic statistics, I would say that maybe even policymakers don't always recognize that there is basically no economic activity without some kind of human contribution, and it's people who work or who make machines work, if I want to put it very simply, and it's people that have to be educated to work well, to be able to perform good economic tasks. It's people whose health is at risk and whose health has to be preserved and improved. So it's people are really in the middle of life, and although it seems that it's the economy that produces the money, it is people who produce the money through economic activities. So I think we have to make that very clear. And I also think that policymakers recognize that actually nowadays, especially when such crisis situations as the pandemic arise, and it's people who get sick and who eventually die, unfortunately, and who need to be vaccinated. And so people are getting back to the center of life, and I think that is that will give us a lot of work in social and economic and demographic statistics, because there will be more and more, as many of us have said already, real-time data on people. And data from people and data on people. And the national data infrastructure, that is also very, national and international data infrastructure that you mentioned, that is also very important for all of us to see that it's not only for business statistics, economic statistics, or macroeconomic statistics that we need data infrastructures. It's also for population and social statistics, which sometimes is more difficult because probably more administrative records are available, or administrative sources are available for economic statistics, because there is some kind of taxation or whatever data that can be used in economic statistics. For social statistics, registers may not be that easily available or not available at all. And also there is a higher sensitivity of the population towards demographic and social data. Why does an official institution want to know about me, about my circumstances, about my health, about my attitudes, about my perceptions? So that makes it also difficult to build a sustainable data infrastructure to collect and produce statistics that are very relevant and needed by policymakers and by all other users of social and demographic statistics. So I think we shall have an extremely interesting discussion in the future. We already have one this morning, this afternoon, so today, but we shall have an extremely interesting and longer and more deep conversation about all this in the future. Thank you for our panelists for this, and now I would like to go to the next part of our panel discussion and talk about realistic deliverables and the road ahead. So what deliverables do we find realistic by the Friends of the Chair group? Maybe just a few brainstorming remarks from our panelists first about what deliverables are realistic. Briefly, and then I would also like to offer the participants to ask and to comment. If we could have it in the chat box, that would be useful as a first round. So Jen and Jose and Steve, about deliverables.
So yeah, a few thoughts for me. I think conceptual frameworks and bringing together our different concepts and definitions and how far we can align those. I think there's, whether that goes as far as characteristics or stays with the key kind of population estimates, migration estimates, how people move between our different countries. I think there is definitely some gains we could make there. I think there is some real issues that I haven't mentioned but have come up around disclosure and confidentiality and how we think about that in the context of linked data sources, from our perspective as well in terms of longitudinal data. So most of our longitudinal data sets at the moment are sample based, so it's much less challenging to think about how you protect people's confidentiality there. If we move to something that's much closer to an entire population, there are real issues there in how we make those data available. The legal gateways Are there things we can learn from each other on those as well? And questions, I guess, around the ethics and proportionality and public acceptability of what we're doing, kind of cross-cutting and things that we could reasonably develop together. Those are the kind of key things, and sharing those models around linked data. This, for us, we're reasonably new to this in the UK, and thinking about how you use data sources that are essentially out of your control. You've not designed the collection mechanisms. You have no control or very little control over the continued use of those administrative sources. Things may change without you knowing. So how do you build that kind of lack of control into your models, build some resilience into them as well? So I think we're probably all developing in the same way, and so a number of those kind of key challenges are things that we could really helpfully collaborate on and also make some real progress. You're on mute, Gabriella.
Yes. Thank you, Jen, and thank you for mentioning ethics. This was something, when we talk about people and data on people, I think ethics is very, very important, and it can help us a lot if we can communicate our ethics well. It can help us a lot to obtain data from people on people. José, please.
Thank you, Gabriella. When I was looking at the terms of reference, I did find that the agenda was ambitious. So I do welcome the opportunity for us today to exchange on what should be the priorities or realistic goals. I think for me, the first thing is the need to recognize that countries may have different contexts in terms of governing laws and policies, and that may have an impact on their infrastructure for their statistical system. So the need, again, for proportionality and necessity comes into play here. I like the idea of thinking of a framework, and that came out of the discussions throughout the morning so far, because I do feel that it helps us focusing on priorities, and it can really, that's where we can really see a return on the investment, right, and make a difference. We've talked about declining response rates. What does that mean in terms of our collection method? So we had a little bit of an exchange so far this morning. So if we're all facing similar challenges in terms of declining response rate, how do we address that collectively? How do we change our approach to collecting information from our respective populations? So we've talked about integration of data using administrative data. I think we also have to recognize that while administrative data can fill some gaps, they do not include important information around the experience lived, or maybe perception or intention of our respondents, and that's a key aspect to social statistics. So maybe some collective thinking could be applied around those issues. And then, so you see, I have lots of questions, not necessarily answers, but I think that if social data are the outputs and the well-being or the quality of life is the outcome that we want to measure, I think we also have to reflect on the implications of designing a social statistics program where there's a link to the economic and the environmental statistics front. So I will stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you, José. Steve?
Okay, so realistic deliverables, Gabriella, that's what you want. So
Yes.
I think what the Friends of the Chair, what we need to do is present a realistic roadmap. And that could be made up of several different roadmaps, because again, from the international perspective, I'm cognizant that many countries are at different stages of development. So some countries may be looking at Canada and thinking that's the future, whereas for Canada, they can't look at Canada to be inspired by the future. So for some, the future is really unknown. For others, they're just looking at maybe more developed countries and just that's their aspiration. So I think we need to be cognizant of that. And I think as we do that, we should try and think as well, if there's a way to help countries leapfrog stages of development. The developing countries have to go through all of the stages that the richer countries went through, or can we somehow fast track or skip some of the development stages when it comes to our economic systems? Obviously, we need to take into account finance. There's no getting around it, but money, the resource implications of what we're going to say needs to be part of the discussion. Others have mentioned confidentiality. I think this is really important. Within the kind of economic or business statistics environment, I think selective confidentiality, if I can call it that, is a legitimate discussion to have. But for social statistics, it's not. So I think there really is equity in that respect. So confidentiality is so much more important. Another challenge that we should think about, and it comes up in the handbook on kind of managing statistical systems, but it's very important. As we talk about the use of secondary data, that also leads to a loss of control of your basic production system. You become increasingly at the mercy of other ministries or big data providers or whoever it is. So kind of providing a roadmap or guidance on how to manage that much more complex environment, which requires a lot more communication, is really, really important. And then an issue that Jen mentioned earlier, which I think is important too, and it's something to think about, which is I think the public tolerance for use, I guess this ties in with the ethics, the public tolerance, I would argue, for using secondary data is elastic. People tend to be much more comfortable with it during crisis. So we saw during COVID, a lot of populations really didn't care less what governments were doing as long as they fixed the situation. But then that elasticity will tend to will harden up as the crisis passes. That then concerns about privacy, about ethics will come back into the fore. So I don't think these are constants. So I think as we think about these things, we need to think about a kind of a cyclical pattern and be aware that they're not constant. Yeah, I think so. In terms of the other realistic deliverables, I think I set them out in the previous interventions. So I'll stop there. Thanks, Gabrielle.
Thank you, Steve. Now I think we could have a look at the chat box to see what questions we have there. I see there are a few technical questions about technical issues to the UK and to Canada. Maybe if you would like to tackle those, Jose, there is something about the keys of how to integrate. How do you manage to use unique identifiers to leak data and still comply with data confidentiality? And also what linkage key you are using. So maybe if you could briefly comment on that. And also there was a question whether you could share the links to these 3 initiatives that you mentioned in your talk. Jose, if you could please, about the keys and about the techniques.
So absolutely, we can share some high-level information about the 3 initiatives that I've mentioned during my intervention. So that's not a problem. I will talk about the linkage keys and how we do this. And I know some of my colleagues are online too, so they want to add to what I'm saying. They are welcome to do so. But basically, the environment that we have is very controlled in terms of who is accessing that information. And we've built that linkage environment on a past experience we had with our health data, where we used to do a lot of linkage that way. So for us to be able to link our information, we use the name of the respondent or the resident in Canada, their date of birth, and parts of their address. So for us, it's the postal code. That information, once it comes to Statistics Canada, whether it's via the census or a survey or administrative data, we collect that information, but it's very restricted in terms of access, and then we assign a different key. So, so that when we bring in information, we can assign that key to the new data set and link the information of the respondent throughout the linkage environment. However, again, this is control. So for us to be able to do a record linkage or data integration, there has to be a proposal, and we have to be able to show the social and public benefit to the Canadian population. And we do this in a very transparent way. All the information in terms of the linkages that we are doing is available on the Statistics Canada website, so that people know what we are doing with their data. And for a linkage to happen, there has to be an approval by our senior management. So it's not just a question, you know, I have this research question and I'm going to go into the linkage environment and select the records that I would like to have. There has to be a very specific purpose and a public benefit for the population. So I hope that helps answer the question that was in the chat.
Thank you, José. I see another interesting question that I would like to share. How do we apply these methods and lessons to be relevant to the countries with weakest capacity? And that is always very important, of course, in the UN and in the SDG setting and the UN setting and any international setting. How can countries with low financial or structural or innovative capacities be involved and be assisted in implementing new methodologies in investing into data infrastructures? So maybe Steve, you could take this question because you are in the international business.
Thanks, Gabrielle. Yeah, I mean, this is the core question, I think, for us, because this isn't really unique to social and demographic statistics. This cuts across all the domains. I think one of the issues, it comes back to the words Jen mentioned earlier, which is data infrastructure. If you use that in its broadest term, I mean, I think one of the critical pieces we have to help member states to realize is, and by realize, I mean implement, is putting in place good infrastructure. So that's thinking about data and helping governments to think as data as infrastructure. So if I go to a ministry and I say I need to put in oil pipes or gas pipes, the ministry will understand instinctively that means, you know, we have to mine the oil, we have to store it, we have to transport it, we need security, we need to transport it. Somehow, if you talk about data, the same kind of intellectual understanding isn't there. So we have to help them to understand that data, just like gas or oil, it needs to be mined, stored, cleaned, protected, disseminated. So that it's the same kind of value chain. So then they need to put in place the elements that allow you to do that. That's things like classifications, not expensive. It's things like unique identifiers. And it's also governance mechanisms. So again, statistical legislation that allow NSOs to access the information. It also means in a lot of countries actually digitizing their administrative data. We see in a lot of countries, administrative data are still paper-based. And in some countries for good reason. In countries where there's very, very poor supply of electricity, there's no real incentive to digitize your information because then you can't get it back if there's a power cut. But nevertheless, if we look at over a longer time horizon and we assume that electricity supplies will improve and stabilize, we need to help countries to plan for these things. So critically, a lot of it is very simple, basic things. It's around good governance. It's around the fundamental principles of official statistics. And it's helping NSOs to actually stand up for those principles and fight for those principles when they're being pressured. I think those are the basics. Everything else then builds on those. Thanks, Gabriela.
Thank you. And good governance and good data governance. I mean, awareness raising is certainly needed for policymakers and politicians to understand that statistical data and statistical infrastructures serve them. And once they invest into it, which is not too much of an investment, if you think about it compared to other difficult and expensive investments like oil pipes, for instance, it can serve them much better than currently. So data governance and governance in general. In fact, we have the Cape Town Global Action Plan, which we didn't mention today yet because this was not the aim of our discussion, but the Cape Town Global Action Plan is there for all statistical systems to benefit from it and to help all statistical systems to bridge data gaps, well identified data gaps, and also to build data infrastructure. So maybe we could also introduce that thinking into our development thinking, development concept to how to build more capacity or how to have built capacity in countries where it is needed. There is another interesting question about how collaboration with the private sector. Is that useful? Is that beneficial? How can we collaborate with the private sector in a way that benefits both sides, and that helps us to produce better and more timely social and demographic data? Any experience with collaboration in this field with the private sector?
I think we probably have more experience of that in the UK on economic statistics and looking at prices in particular. But on the demographic statistics side, one area we're exploring is mobile phone data, for example, to really help us understand those movements of the population that happen kind of during the day, times of the week, times of the year. And also whether of those data sources can help give us some contextual information around our population estimates. But we also considered things like store cards data, and we've done some work with some of our big supermarkets to see whether their store card data will help us, and things that. So within the UK, particularly since the pandemic, people actually see their GP face to face far less than they have done previously. They interact via apps, via the telephone, and then prescriptions are sent to their local pharmacy. So is there information from the pharmacies that would tell us where people are actually collecting their prescriptions, because there's no longer such a strong incentive to change the GP that you're registered with if you move around. So we're starting to think through some of these potential quite different data sources for us, but then there's the financial side to that as well, and how much might it cost us to access some of these data sources. And just whilst I've got the floor, I just wanted to go back to Steve's point about the infrastructure as well. And I think as well as the infrastructure, there's some really key skills that we need to make these systems and the infrastructures work, and skills around data architecture, data engineers, data science, that are really fundamental to what we're trying to do and in quite short supply. But if we can work together to build those skills and share those skills, I'd see that as being a real kind of benefit of the group.
You're muted, Gabriela.
I'm sorry. Jose, would you like to mention experience with private sector?
I can mention experience in the private sector, and I can also answer a question in the chat around race, if that's okay, Gabriela.
Sure.
So I'll start with that, and I know we have some of the experts from Statistics Canada on the line as well. So I just want to clarify that at Statistics Canada, we do not collect information on race. We collect information on ethnocultural background. So we prefer to set the question so that respondents can recognize themselves and decide what really represent them. So that's my first point. So for many years, we've collected information around visible minorities. And as society evolves, concepts are changing. So we are now consulting around the term visible minorities and what that means. So this is why today I was using racialized groups. So that's how we define currently the term. There was something around Indigenous people. So we have standardized content around our Indigenous people's question, which we use in all of our surveys. It's also on the census. So that's really at the base for us to be able to identify Indigenous people, but also the breakdown. So the distinct identities of the Indigenous people. So and as you can see, they are not part of the racialized group. So those are different identities. So I wanted to make that point. And then in terms of using private sector data, I was trying to think quickly if I had an example where we are doing that at this point. We have tried in the past to look at banking information. So that was around 2018, and that didn't work for various reasons. But that experience for us has really enabled us to look at the necessity and the proportionality. So in terms of why are we doing this and why do we need the information? So we now have an ethics committee at Statistics Canada that will look some of those requests, but particularly with the lens of why is it necessary and why do we need to acquire a certain number of records? Could we do with less, so that it goes with the social acceptability of Canadians? So I will stop there, Gabriela.
Thank you. Steve, I think I saw you're moving towards an answer.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think accessing and using private sector data is going to be critical. I don't think we can get away from it. And I think that's half the motivation for the World Data Forum. It's really to bring kind of traditional statisticians and private sector together. So, I think we're already on that track. But anybody who's read some of my stuff will know I've been quite critical of the open data movement, because it's really to date has just focused on public sector. And I think that's a problem. I think that's introducing an asymmetry that needs to be addressed. But I think there are issues around access, obviously, from a legal perspective, from a confidentiality perspective. There's cost issues, and there's also stability issues. I mean, private sector aren't there to provide data for us. And if we access them and use them, it adds additional cost to us because those data aren't necessarily stable. But nevertheless, there's huge potential. I mean, I just give you a very simple example. I'm not sure if they're exactly private sector, but we had a meeting with NASA and with NOAA last Friday. And they've been mapping river basins all around the world at very high resolution. So now they can predict floods about 2 weeks before the event. But now, by merging these data with other climatic conditions, we're actually in the process now of investigating, can we build a small area risk factors database for the spread of cholera, which we can then alert health facilities in the area. We're not necessarily saying that there is a cholera outbreak, but we're saying there's a much higher risk of an outbreak given the water levels and the climatic conditions. And so currently we're mapping that against cholera outbreaks because we have those geotagged. So we're actually testing the predictive quality of the model. But this is the type of thing using satellite data that we could never have done before, and it's a new dimension, certainly in international statistics, where we're moving beyond simply providing historical information. This is probably as close to real time as we'll ever get, where we can actually give predictive risk factors to hospitals and say, look, there's a risk of cholera in your area. You need to prepare. And I think it's only accessing these new types of data can we start to provide these types of information. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I see our time is over, unfortunately. I think this was a very interesting discussion. I won't really have time to summarize, really, but I would like to give a few keywords that as takeaways before we leave. One was conceptual frameworks, data sources, data integration, disaggregation of data, data infrastructures, investment into data infrastructures, awareness raising, policy needs, policy analysis. I think these are the first words or keywords that came to my mind after our discussion, but I don't want to do injustice to anybody. So I hope in the future we can broaden these keywords also, and of course put more flesh around them. I would like to thank our panelists for their very warm contributions. I would like to thank UNSD for organizing this meeting and all the, I think it was 222 participants to this event who thought it interesting to join us. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I wish us all a good time before the Commission, at the Commission, and in the Friends of the Chair group in the future. Thank you all for participating and for contributing. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.